would like to invite our chairperson, Dr. Vaishali Abhay Kumar Baswada. Very good morning, ma'am. I would also like her. I would also request her to please present her screen. And as it's her as the first presentation is of Dr. Vaishali, ma'am, can I request you to please share your screen? Thank you.
A very good morning to everyone who's listening to us on this Saturday morning. And we promise that we will try and make it worth your while for sitting through these webinars, which is not every time easy. Actually, it's my privilege and honor to be part of this esteemed panel, particularly with Professor Jagatram sir here. And he was the first one to log in. So, I mean, so much to learn from you, sir. It never ends. And we will be having talks on mainly talking about current perspectives and the current paradigms in pediatric cataract management. And we hope to have at least a couple of questions after every talk. But my request to the speakers is that in case we are running behind time, we might have to take the last 2 or 3 talk discussion at the end, but we will try to have some discussion after every talk. Now, I will be talking about, I think, something that is becoming controversial now and which is becoming important. When do you plan the surgery for every patient and what strategy should you take? And I have no financial interest here. We all know that pediatric cataracts present to us right from congenital to developmental, and they have different types of morphologies or different types of presentations. So depending on the density, depending on the age, other factors, and a lot, I think now we all realize after so many years of work by leaders like Professor Jagatram and my dad, we know that it's just not operating. You can do it even at 15 days of age, but that may not be the best thing for the child. So I think now what is very important is available experience and infrastructure in the system. And before I move ahead, good morning and welcome, Dr. Sumita ma'am. We are happy to have you with us.
Morning.
In unilateral cataracts, Dr. Plager and Dr. Birch, and they had done pioneering work way back, and they said that we should wait at least for 4 to 5 weeks. But I think there are newer approaches coming in, and most of the experts on the panel and outside would agree that even in a unilateral cataract, there is always a risk benefit of how much you can benefit the patient in terms of combating amblyopia versus what harm you can do by 2 things. One, a very early anesthesia early on in life, and any other technical complications. We all know now that glaucoma, for example, which is the most deadly complication, is seen more when you operate the child early on, and particularly when the child is operated below 3 months of age. There is ample evidence to show that glaucoma and other complications, technical complications, are much higher. So what we have done over the last few years is we try to wait for at least 6 to 8 weeks minimum, even in a unilateral cataract. Yes, we may be adding into some amblyopia, but then the eye is bigger, the body is more able to take the anesthesia, and we end up doing what we want surgically much more. So I think for us, the paradigm is shifting a little bit in terms of timing of surgery. We don't anymore take pride in saying that I operated a 1.5-week-old baby. We try and wait for at least 6 to 8 weeks for a unilateral cataract. For bilateral cataracts, particularly which are not complete and total, this window is extended to as much as 3 months sometimes. And between surgeries, this is also what we are changing recently. We try to wait for 3 to 4 weeks between surgeries because we do not realize 2 aspects. One is the effect the repeated anesthesia may be causing. And there is work that is showing neurotoxicity in the developmental neural system. So we want the drug to wash out completely from the system and have least effects. And also, I think it's a lot of parental and family stress to be putting these drops and medication 6 times, 8 times, multiple, going through the trauma of that operated eye. So in many ways, it does good to wait for 3 to 4 weeks between surgeries in a bilateral cataract. So that is, I think, something that is changing. This is one of the latest articles. There are many which have come, but this, I think, was the latest that is published. And it also talks about bilateral cataract surgery. It's a review and says that if you operate around 6 months versus at 3 months of age, you might actually be doing more good to the child. So moving on, after the timing, I think the next thing is what are the strategy? Most important would be pre-operative, operative, and post-operative. Now, for me, pre-operatively, counseling becomes one of the most challenging and rewarding, both, because that will help you pave the way for everything that we do. Obviously, when to operate, safety of anesthesia, and all that is paradigm. Examination under anesthesia cannot be skipped or missed, even if you do it on the same day of surgery. That has to be a separate part of the surgical protocol. And what we do at our center is, after the EUA is done and before the surgery started, the surgeon himself or herself steps out and talks to the patients that this is what we saw. Although we knew grossly this is what it was, but this is what we finally have measured and seen. And this is our plan ABC, and this is what we should expect. So I think even if you cannot do a separate EUA, which may not be possible, especially in these COVID times when you don't want to have the patient back and forth and too many anesthesias, I think we do need to take it as a separate entity for the staff, for the clinic, everybody. And now with low flow systems, closed circuit systems, the use of safer gases like sevoflurane, and for EUAs, laryngeal mask anesthesias, these are becoming more and more safe. But yes, also involving your pediatrician and your ICU colleagues, particularly when the child is an infant, is of paramount importance in your surgical strategy. So always have a good friendly tie-up with somebody who has an ambulance, who can come and take the child with an intubation if needed. Now, what do we do under anesthesia? Handheld keratometry when the child is not cooperative. If the child is cooperative, now we also take help of these modern diagnostics like Pentacam, iTrace, topography, keratometry. But this typically we see is only for children 5 or 6 years and above. IOL has to be calculated. Ideally, you should have access to at least a contactor in immersion biometry and a handheld keratometry. If not, there are beautiful references which will tell you normative data, but I mean, that should not be a point of contention of operating or not operating. When you do an EUA, now I think we need to move on. I mean, just doing a keratometry, biometry may not be enough. Gonioscopy, if you have access, B-scan, UBM, these are all very, very important in understanding and helping us evolve as surgeons and doing much better for our patients. IOL power calculation, well, it's anybody's guess. And we do target some hypermetropia depending on the age. And we did some studies based on which for an SRKT or the Holiday 2 is our choice for all eyes, all pediatric eyes. But if we can get an optical biometry, that means a Lenstar or an IOL Master or a TOMI, then Barrett Universal 2 is becoming a go-to formula even for older children now. What I have learned a lot from so many presentations I've attended in CMEs is documentation. Buy your own SLR. It doesn't have to be a Sony 3 chip or an expensive camera. Buy your own SLR from your savings and just attach it to your microscope and take pictures and videos and make folders for each patient so that you know what is happening. It's good to operate, but it's good to know what you are ending up with. Yes, when you do frequent EUAs, the complications are a problem. And therefore, we now do EUAs at least twice a year, 2 to 3 times a year in the first year of follow-up. And until 5 years or until the child is cooperative enough, we keep doing EUAs at least once in 6 months, unless it is indicated earlier. And obviously, these are all done quick, safe anesthesias. What systemic tests, including genetic evaluation? Well, in microphthalmos and other comorbid conditions, there is a battery of tests to be done. Even systemically, would you evaluate? For us, I think doing a torch and basic investigations, including a 2D echocardiography for GA purpose mainly, when the child is below 1 or 2 years of age. But apart from a good fitness, that should not be sort of a point of contention. Do we have 2 minutes more, Dr. Gina?
You can take mine.
Yeah, no, I don't need. I'm just asking. So in terms of surgical strategy, Dr. Jagatram sir is going to be talking more about that. But my only point I want to make here, and which is more of a request and discussion with all of you for junior surgeons like me, I have a plan A. Yes, I'll do a posterior capsular axis, optic capture, this, that. If it does not, what do? I will do a vitrectomy and leave the child aphakic. But my whole thing is better safe than sorry. There is no ego in implanting an IOL I need to do a glued IOL, I need to do a Yamane. This is not the thing to do in children, particularly for those of us who are, very brave heart surgeons in adults. This is a very different ball game, and please treat it differently. And that's, I think, my request. And with that, I would end my talk. Thank you.
I think the timing buzzer is for 8 minutes. So as in this talk in program, you have kept 10 minutes.
Okay.
Can I request a lady to keep this buzzer at 10 minutes and not at 8 minutes?
And in terms of the approach, I think the cornerstone is managing the posterior capsule and the vitreous along with the lens. So depending on your comfort and what you are used to or experienced with, vitrectomy, lensectomy is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong. Doing a manual anterior and posterior capsular excision, if you can do in the bag or an optic capture of IOL would be ideal. But again here, only one thing I would say is that if you cannot do an in the bag IOL of any sort, either a primary in the bag with vitrectomy or a optic capture, it is no point having an ego issue and putting that lens, squeezing it through the sulcus, or trying to do any child below 4 or 5 years. I will not even do a scleral fixated or a, glued IOL or a Yamane IOL. Better to leave the child aphakic and then do a secondary depending on how these eyes grow and how they are going to behave in terms of inflammation. Because we have learned, and Dr. Steve Charles, I've heard him in 1 or 2 courses. He's a big proponent, and I totally agree that whenever you manipulate the uveal tissue, either surgically or in the long run indirectly, you will not be able to tackle the consequences that will happen in these young eyes. So that is something I would go with. And with that, I think my 10 minutes are up, and we can take a couple of questions or comments from the experts.
I think this is an excellent presentation, and you have very rightly said that how early we can operate these children, particularly infant, when the particularly infant should be operated. And how we have to examine the child under anesthesia after dilatation. That is what we also follow the same thing. So that is, I think, one of the issue for among the surgical tip for success. These are part and parcel of that. So my part will be covered by. So this is nice, very nice present.
I think it's important for all of us in the community of our colleagues to understand that if you do not have a good team of a good anesthesia, good infrastructure, and rehabilitation and all that, we better not touch these eyes, particularly the very young children, for ego issue, and send it, co-manage with the people who are managing and experts in pediatric cataract management. So send it to PGI, send it to any centers near to you. But if you do not have the right support of the medical people and the infrastructure, I think you should not take the children for cataract surgery who is less than 2 years of age or so on, because you may do more harm rather than the help. Yeah.
I think you make a very good point on gonioscopy, because that is something which is very, very important. All your good work of doing a surgery can be very quickly undone if the glaucoma develops. So I think a lot of these children do have abnormal angles, and sometimes with the goniotomy and all, you can combine it with cataract surgery and make your life really easy, especially in very, very dysgenetic angles. So gonioscopy has been, apart from everything what you mentioned, gonioscopy has been part of our pre-surgery evaluation.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry for interrupting in between, but we'll have to move on to the next speaker.
I think, would you keep 10 minutes as a buzzer? We have
so actually, yes, we can do that, but we need this time for discussion so that we hand over the talk.
We have enough. We have 5 speakers and 10 minutes each. We are only 5. So please keep your buzzer at 10 minutes, please.
Sure, sir. I'll keep it at 9 so that they get an idea that within 1 minute they'll have to sum up. So
right. Okay.
At 9 and 10, 2 buzzers.
So nice. So nice.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Moving on to the next speaker, I would like to welcome Dr. Jagat Ram.
Okay. Thank you very much. It is an honor for me to present in this instruction course. I'm thankful to Dr. Vaishali Vasavada as well as Dr. Vasavada for my accommodating me my topic in this instruction course. My topic is surgical tips for success of pediatric cataract surgery. There are several issues. It is not a single thing that is required for success. It is extremely important that pre-operative evaluation and accurate IOL power calculation is very, very important. And in the pre-operative evaluation, you have to have a complete examination of the child, and you have to dilate the pupil, and you have to see the child under slit lamp. Sometime or many times we examine the child under anesthesia, as Dr. Vaishali Vasavada said, and I think IOL power calculation that will come subsequently. And then after, once you plan the patient for surgical procedure, meticulous surgical technique is extremely important. Surgery is not the only thing. I think it is post-operative evaluation and monitoring of the child in the follow-up period, and ultimate visual rehabilitation, such as even if you place IOL, even then you have to go for refractive correction, and many of the children, particularly unilateral cataract, those operated for unilateral cataract, they need occlusion therapy. I believe we have more than 30-year follow-up of these children. Long-term follow-up is extremely important in these cases. And this is, I think, the first, this picture shows the first picture in the first post-operative day. This is the, actually what is important is that it should be a perfect surgery, clear visual axis. And the second picture shows anterior axis and posterior axis, and in the bag placement of IOL. The third picture is again IOL in the bag. This is about, I think, 25 to 30 years old when PMM IOL were being used. This is a pharmacia IOL that point of time, placed in the capsular bag. Primary posterior capsulotomy has been done, and it shows clear visual axis. So what are the various issues of concern in children? Child may be uncooperative for examination as well as for biometry. Several time or most of the time they may need examination under anesthesia. Another issue is that there is rapidly changing axial growth or axial length of the child, particularly in the first 2 years of life. Another important issue is that particularly unilateral cataract children, majority of them, almost 60% or so, they may be amblyopic. They may not achieve optimal vision unless they are visually rehabilitated and occlusion therapy performed. Timing of the surgery already said. Implantation of the IOL, where to implant or not, is another issue. Post-operative myopic shift is one of the extremely important issue, and there are several of the complications, including posterior capsular opacification. So we have to see these children for in the post-operative period and document any of the complication and manage it. It is already said, as far as we are concerned, we operate as early as 4 to 6 weeks. Mostly at 6 weeks or so, child is okay for anesthesia. But bilateral cataract, we keep the gap. It may vary from 2 to 4 weeks operating the two eyes. Contraindication is if axial length is less than 17 millimeter, corneal diameter smaller than 9 millimeter, or if there is a anterior segment anomaly or active uveitis. These are the contraindication. the general consensus in pediatric for pediatric surgeon is to implant IOL wherever possible, wherever there is no contraindication, and the acceptable age is becoming progressively younger. IOL power calculation, it is extremely important. Younger children may not cooperate for biometry. Most of the time, those who are very small children, infant, and in the first 2 years of life, we use handheld keratometer, and many a time in the operation theater. And we also take their axial length. Then those children who are cooperative, we use IOL master, particularly in the older children. And this is one of the earliest guidelines by Dahan, where children less than 2 years of age, we undercorrect biometry by 20% and 2 to 8 years by 10%. Or if it is not possible, these are only the guidelines. If it is not possible to do this, then we may even take estimate from the axial length. These are the such as for 17 millimeter, 28, 18, 27, or such as for 21 millimeter axial length, 22. These are the rough estimate, and by experience we know that we should not keep the child much more hypermetropic, because gross difference will also lead to problem in the correction and amblyopia. This is some of the other study which shows that to compensate for the myopic shift till 5 years of age, according to this author, child is kept myopic, and that is kept hypermetropic, and that decreases with the as the increase in the age of the child. Very rightly, Professor Basavade also said that it is a team which has to do the job. We need ophthalmologist, pediatrician, examine the child for any systemic anomaly. Anesthetist is very important, and then optometrist also plays an extremely important role, because repeated refraction in these children, and parents, of course, is number one most important. Counseling has to be done, as already said by Dr. Vaishali. It is very, very important, because we have to explain that it is not a just one-time surgery. They have to have these children has to have follow-up, and we have to also explain the various post-operative complications, various surgical procedure. What we have to choose is phacoaspiration and PC IOL implantation, particularly in older children, 8 year and older. Primary posterior capsulotomy with the anterior vitrectomy with capsular bag fixation of IOL. This is what we do in majority, over 90% of the cases. Usually 6 years and younger, we make primary posterior capsulotomy. 6 to 8 years, sometime we also judge the compliance of whether they will come for follow-up or not. But majority of the children, they come for follow-up. But if we make sometime larger posterior capsulotomy, then even we do optic capture with or without anterior vitrectomy. Lensectomy and anterior vitrectomy is done for those children where it is a microophthalmia or microcornea, where IOL implantation is contraindicated. These are some of the issues. These include general anesthesia in children, elastic anterior capsule and posterior capsule, vitreous pressure, shallow anterior chamber, posterior capsulotomy, centration of the IOL, decreased scleral rigidity, and these are some of the challenging cases. There are numerous in these cases, and this is a demonstration of one of the child where we have done well-centered rexes, ideally, rhexis should be about around 5 millimeter or so. And this is a small, this is a surgical video of a child who had bilateral cataract. This is the child where we dilated. And you can see this $1 million smile of this child having bilateral cataract. And this is after dilatation. Actually, it was found to be posterior lenticonus. And here we have made side port incision and then staining the anterior capsule. In many of the cases where it is a white cataract or particularly beginner surgeon, they may also like to do the same. And here it is continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis and followed by hydrodissection and then removal of the cortex from the capsular bag. And we have to remove all the cortical material and even fibril from the capsular bag. This came out to be posterior.
Sir, can I request you to please conclude? It's time up, sir.
Okay, time up.
Dr. Jinal, I think we have an hour to go and we are only after these 3 more speakers. So maybe we can extend by a couple of minutes. We have enough time for discussion as well.
Ma'am, actually, according to my schedule, I have 10 minutes for each doctor with discussion. So that's how I am proceeding.
Yes, but
I don't think that 10 minutes is over, but I don't have.
we have only 5 speakers. So you have a buffer of 10 minutes.
Okay, ma'am, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
2 minutes I can add up in the timer. Thank you, ma'am.
Next. And this is a classical case where it is a zonular type of cataract. We are placing a side port incision, particularly for younger people and those who are beginner. This is here staining of the capsule, and then this is the main incision. And this is continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. Hydrodissection, removal of the cortex from the capsular bag. And this is after removal of the cortex from the bag, and this is anterior rhexis. This will be followed by posterior continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. Most of the time this is with the Utrata forceps, but if sometime we are stuck up, we do not hesitate to use vitrectomy cutter. But here it is alone with this Utrata forceps. And then we place in such patient IOL in the capsular bag. Almost 100% of the cases we use hydrophobic acrylic IOL, and most of the time it is single piece, but some of the time it may be 3-piece IOL, but the single piece IOL should not be placed in the sulcus. And this is occlusion therapy. It is very critical, particularly for the management of amblyopia. And these are some of the cases where microphthalmia or some other problem, or some older days these aphakic glasses are used, abnormal size of the spectacle frames, and surgery is just the first step, and the follow-up is extremely important. You have to examine the child very carefully. Most importantly, the word of the Illis are worth remembering. Young children with an IOL in place are the unique clinical responsibility of an ophthalmologist, and long-term follow-up is especially important. We have follow-up of 35 year of the children. Next. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was excellent. So comprehensive and wonderful surgical tips. It makes surgery look so easy when we see your videos all the time.
No, we also see Surge video and your video, that is not less. I think you people do excellent surgery. We are impressed by surgical procedure which sir we learned from sir, whatever.
No, sir, those perfectly centered CCCs and PCCs and of such a large size, it's really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Very true. I think Professor Jagatram has told and taught us how to do the cataract surgery in children, and he rightly emphasized that surgeon is an important part of the game, but not the only one. The parents, he said, is the most important part, and follow-up. You remember, he keeps telling 30 years of follow-up and so on. So it's a lifetime commitment. Once you take a child cataract for cataract surgery, whatever you do, keep following up. And we are going to listen in the previous to last presentation what they do in the follow-up and so on. So I think this is excellent. Okay.
I have one question before we move on. I would like each panelist to give just a brief one-line response. What is your cutoff age for performing a vitrectomy, anterior vitrectomy for a pediatric cataract in an otherwise normal child who can generally cooperate for a YAG or something?
Usually, I do up to 6 years of age, but that is not the exclusive. Sometimes those children who have posterior lenticonus or posterior polar, or these may extend even beyond 6 years. But by and large, after 6 years, many of the children, they cooperate for ND YAG laser capsulotomy. So younger children, less than 6 years or less, we do primary posterior capsulotomy and anterior vitrectomy.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sunita.
I think
yeah, you can go ahead.
No, Sunita, go ahead. We want to listen from Sunita.
Then Varshini, in that case, we move on to you.
So 6 to 7 years usually in normal cataracts, but in traumatic cataracts, still older if the PC is thickened especially.
Yeah, I think most of us do the same as Professor
Sunita.
Jagatram said, you know.
Okay.
I think 8 years is what we do, anterior vitrectomy, and I do for every child who has nystagmus also, because it's very difficult to YAG them. So the children have nystagmus and traumatic cataract I do for everyone, even irrespective of age.
So I think the idea of everybody has highlighted this, that unless we manage the posterior capsule and the anterior vitreous, it is really mostly no point doing the cataract surgery, especially for younger children. So that is something which we must realize. And just doing a posterior capsulorhexis, if you're not capturing the IOL in a younger child, again brings you back almost to the same situation. And now we move on to the next talks, Dr. Jean.
Yes. And now I would like to welcome Dr. Vasavada Abhay Kumar Raghukant. A very good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. And Jinal, you're doing a great job in timekeeping, but don't worry about it. We will not take 1 minute more. So don't worry. We'll have our own way of doing it, but carry on. You're doing a great job.
No, I'm extremely apology. I got confused with the panel discussion. There is a separate 25 minutes for that, but I'll add it into this only now. So we can go on till 11:25.
No, we will go up to 11:25, but not beyond that. So don't worry.
Definitely, sir. I'm sure.
Thank you so very much. So I do receive research grant support from Alcon, but has no relevance in this particular presentation, and acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues, Dr. Deepa, Vaishali, Shail, and many others at our center. I think, unlike the adults, as Professor Jagatram said, the objective of the cataract surgery in children first, and that is to make sure that the eye remains safe, not only on the immediate period, but lifelong in the eye. So technically speaking, we want to make eye sound. That's our first objective. If it doesn't remain, the second stage of achieving functional outcome remains a theory. So functional outcome, naturally, we want to prevent further amblyopia development and also develop the binocular vision, and if in a unilateral cataract as well, with the help of additional optical means. Why should we implant an IOL? Obviously, we want to have an early rehabilitation. The thick aphakic glasses do pose problems to the parents and children, and contact lenses in majority of our scenarios is impractical. However, whatever we do is we need to keep correcting refractive error in a growing eye, and that's what Jagat Ram said, help of the optometrist all the time. And why we should be concerned or not implant is because of not able to achieve bag implantation consistently in your hand. And if you cannot, you be careful. Many of these eyes produce exaggerated, accelerated uveal inflammation because uveal tissue is immature, the barrier are not fully formed, and we need to be careful. Little flutter of the iris, little iris coming to the side ports is enough to produce cell deposits and glaucoma and so on. So I think increased visual axis obscuration and need for secondary procedure, and all of these are a concern for not putting the lens. Primary implantation is the way consensus is developing, certainly in children about 2 years of age, and also perhaps in unilateral cataract at some centers and our team with some experience. However, if you leave the eye aphakic, with your choice, or if you have to, keep secondary implantation in mind when you operate for aphakia. So in other words, keep the capsular support intact as much as you can, anterior and posterior, when you do a primary aphakia, and take up for secondary implantation once the child is 4 years of age. And you have a choice of bag or sulcus and transscleral or intrascleral fixation once the child is about that age. In the bag implantation, and anti-vitrectomy, as we discussed already, is mandatory in children who are very young. And we can achieve that, as we heard in the first presentation, in more than one way in the bag implantation. I'll refer to some of the studies which have reported a 10 years follow-up of infants group, and they concluded that IOL group performed worse than the aphakic group. Similarly, there is a review in the ophthalmology written by some of these authors who also concluded that IOL option is no better than the contact lens management. But mind you, in that study report, they were given free contact lenses, and the contact lens care was at even domiciliary. So I think for us, that's not very relevant what they found. And incidence of visual axis obscuration was higher in pseudophakic growth, and so was the residual refraction. The registry of the bilateral cataract removal of the infants published in 2019 by some of those same authors also concluded that the visual acuity after bilateral cataract was comparable in both these patients. IOL placement increased the risk of visual axis obscuration and secondary procedure, and also occurrence of glaucoma. So it seems that the primary implantation is okay in the children who are more than 2 years of age, but still we do not know what's the situation here in 2 years, under 2 years of age. So I'm trying to get the cursor here, right? We published a 5 years post-operative outcomes of randomized study of bilateral aphakia and pseudophakia in children under 2 years of age in American Journal of Ophthalmology. And it's not moving now here. Jankana, the thing is not moving here. My slides are not moving. Yeah, okay, got it. So we got that study with the purpose of comparing complications mainly, and then visual outcomes in that particular cohort. Postoperative complications were glaucoma, visual axis obscuration, and uveal inflammatory response primarily, and then the visual acuity. The glaucoma was defined by the conventional laid down by the experts, and we did the pre and post-operative gonioscopy in all of these cases. A significant visual axis obscuration was judged subjectively, whether it was fibrous or proliferative in type, and then the secondary procedure was decided on. Synechiae formation was quite common, and cell deposits, which most of these deposits disappear within 4 to 6 months. The complication rate between the aphakic and pseudophakic group was comparable in terms of the glaucoma and visual axis obscuration, but posterior synechiae and cell deposits were more in IOL group in that study that we reported. So we concluded in that study that incidence of postoperative complications was comparable in terms of the glaucoma and the visual axis obscuration, but higher incidence of inflammatory response reflected in the synechiae formation and pseudophakic eyes. However, it didn't impact in a clinical sense and in terms of the visual acuity that they achieved. As we heard earlier, IOL implantation can be done first with the posterior capsular axis performed, and then putting the lens in the eye. And like Professor Jagatram, we prefer single piece Acrysop because of its increased stability, but 3-piece is a very, very good option for in-the-bag implantation. This is something which we do quite often in eyes where we are not confident of performing a PCCC, and we use trocar for pars plana lensectomy. So we introduce a trocar first before we open the eye, and then through the high cut rates possible with the machine, we perform a controlled capsulectomy followed by anti-vitrectomy, and we are able to do that. Advantage here is that the in-the-bag implantation is ensured. However, performing pars plana approach is not that easy, and it needs some learning curve. The key question is, and therefore we have certain age, when will you not do vitrectomy? Because we know that vitrectomy can have a bad consequences in the long run, and also its impact on the growing eye. We don't know what will be the influence of vitrectomy in the growth of the eye, what will be its impact on the glaucoma formation and the postoperative time, and so on. So Dr. Gimbel translated the principle of optic capture into pediatric eyes and reported that in older children, and he did it in children about 5 years, that the optic capture can avoid anti-vitrectomy. So this is one example of that technique. The cataract is aspirated as we have seen earlier, and then a larger capsular axis in the posterior capsule is performed, anterior and posterior capsule, and then the optic is pushed towards the vitreous through that larger posterior capsular axis, each half one at a time. And then both the capsule, the anterior capsular axis and the posterior capsular axis are in front of the optic, and the vitreous phase is intact. Sometimes when you perform PCCC and vitreous phase is disturbed, you can perform anti-vitrectomy and still continue with the capture if you have adequate size. And this is how it looks, generally speaking. So we did that study, a randomized study again, whether the optic capture can avoid anti-vitrectomy. So we had published that in journal JCRS in 2017, and we compared the complications in children up to 4 years of age having conventional surgery versus optic capture without anti-vitrectomy. And we randomized that. We could not perform capture in 5 out of 31 eyes. 3 eyes had a plaque and 2 eyes was too big a rhexis. And we had to perform vitrectomy in 2 eyes, but all of these eyes did quite well, and 3 had IOL in the bag. The visual axis obscuration in both the groups, group 1 in the bag and optic capture at 12 months, 24 months, and 36 months were comparable with not significant in terms of the statistics. And same thing below 1 year versus 1 to 4 years. Also, there was no difference in between the 2 groups or between the 2 eyes. So same thing was reflected in uveal inflammation, was identical, whether we did vitrectomy or we did capture without vitrectomy. The cell deposits were comparable with no significance. So we concluded in that optic capture randomized study that 3-piece hydrophobic IOL, it's possible to capture in majority of the cases, and visual axis obscuration and glaucoma, and also inflammation, which was a little surprise to us. We expected more inflammation in the capture group because of the capsular fibrosis that can occur, but they were identical at 1 year follow-up. So this is an alternative surgical technique which can avoid vitrectomy. And however, this technique has a flaw. It is not easy to perform, and there are eyes where you will end up in a mess if you are not able to control the size. And also, it's very difficult to perform this under 6 months of age. In our study, we had the patient under 6 months, and that there were not many, fortunately, but it is not easy to perform this capture under 6 months of age. So I think, summary, if I have to say, the adult cataract surgeons who are willing to take up the pediatric cataract in their management plan need to gain confidence first by operating and managing older children. The team will get the experience and confidence, and then take up the younger children. But think before you take up a child less than a year, and certainly under 6 months of age, because under 6 months, the complication rate is high in everybody's hand. Primarily the difficulties in the intraoperative, the uveal trauma and the uveal inflammation, and equally in the glaucoma. So I would caution in general from a podium to suggest implantation under 6 months of age for these cataract surgeons who do not have the right team and a long-term experience. So thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, sir. This was just excellent presentation and very right advice given, because everybody thinks that they are the pediatric ophthalmologist and pediatric cataract surgeon and start implanting IOL in less than 6 months and come up with several of the complications. Whereas we people are also very selective in implantation of IOL under 6 months of age, sir.
Right. Thank you, Jagat. I agree.
Dr. Sumita and Dr. Varshini, one by one, what is your general message in the same way for particularly in infants? Do you do an IOL or would you leave the child aphakic?
For me, I think it is an anatomical decision, honestly speaking, because in an institute, I do have all the team as mentioned by Dr. Vasavada. I do have pediatrician, I do have anesthetist, I do have a support hospital to transfer the babies. So that decision is, and I've been doing for 15 years now. So the experience is there, but still there are some children I would leave aphakic if I'm not sure that they are going to come back for follow-up. A lot of us get, I'm sure Dr. Jagatram also faces that issue about poor follow-up. So sometimes if I'm not sure about the follow-up, I don't put the IOL. Unilateral cases, I do try to put the IOL as much as possible. But bilateral cases, I do sometimes leave them aphakic if I'm not sure they are coming back for follow-up. That I'm talking strictly about 6 months and below. So, and of course, as I said, decision for me is anatomical. If the axial length is around 18 or more, corneal diameter is 10 millimeters or more, I would plan for an IOL.
Thank you, ma'am. Varshini?
Yeah, I completely agree with ma'am. But again, I don't have the same level of support which you get in a institution. So if it is a younger child, say less than 6 to 8 months, with a lot of systemic issues where you think anesthesia might be complicated, I tend to refer them to a higher center, especially with AIIMS so nearby. And they generally tend to come back for a follow up. So I think that even in anesthesia, if you think that there are multiple other systemic issues happening, especially cardiac issues, then I think those are the children we need to be very cautious about.
Thank you. So I think we move on to the next talk, which is Dr. Varshini's talk.
Very good morning, ma'am. Can I request you to please share your screen?
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Vaishali for this opportunity, and it is wonderful to be sharing the stage with such stalwarts. Now, my topic is visual rehabilitation following pediatric cataract surgery. So I call this the next 5 years after the surgery is done. So achieving a good vision outcome, it requires an early surgery, early removal of the cataract, as we have learned, consistent optical correction of the aphakia or the residual refractive error, and compliance in occlusion of the other eye. So as we've already heard from Sir, IATS was a multi-centric trial comparing aphakia with correction with contact lenses with intraocular lenses in infants with unilateral congenital cataract less than 6 months old. At 5 years, and now we have the 10 years results as well. The visual acuity final results were quite poor, with about 50% of eyes having a poor visual acuity of less than 20/200. They also had a high incidence of complications in the IOL group. Now, comparing this with Dr. Vasavada's study in bilateral cataract surgery, as expected, the visual acuity recovery was much better, with the children having a moderate visual impairment of 20/60 to 20/80. But one thing which was different was the contact lens acceptance and compliance, which was extremely poor. So that gives us an idea on what kind of refractive devices work in our clinical setting. So either aphakic or pseudophakic amblyopia therapy starts with refractive correction, which happens with glasses, contact lenses, or a secondary IOL, as has been described in detail. So spectacles provide satisfactory correction for bilateral aphakia. The material which we prefer is CR39 or polycarbonate. Near dominant glasses need to be prescribed up to 3 years of age. And at this point in the last photograph, I also want to point out that many of these children have multiple systemic issues as well as hearing issues. So they wear hearing aids, they have cochlear implants. So a high powered aphakic glasses for rehabilitation may not be practically possible. This child is wearing an ear suspender in order to keep the hearing aid in place. So these may be considerations where we may decide to implant an IOL instead of leaving a child aphakic. Contact lenses are really good optical devices, and I feel that the parents have more of an apprehension than the child, who's usually really comfortable with the contact lenses. We tend to use them in our anisometropic amblyopes as well, and if they get used to it, then it works extremely well. The extended wear silicone elastomer lenses are what we go for in the RGPs for those where that is not acceptable or it's too expensive. With primary implantation of IOL being done in even the youngest children, with a planned undercorrection of about 6 to 8 diopters, so that almost all of these children are going to have a high amblyogenic residual hyperopia. So again, in these children, we need to give near dominant glasses in ages less than 3. And bifocals or progressive lenses, again, the acceptance rate is quite good over maybe 5 to 6 years of age once they learn how to use the near segment. As emphasized previously, routine EUAs are extremely important in the follow-up of these children. So coming to the main crux of this talk, patching as a therapy was first described by Al-Harani in 980. So basically what we want to see is where have we come from then in the past more than 1,000 years. One thing to emphasize is that children with cataract have stimulus deprivation amblyopia, which is less than 3% of all amblyopia. And as such, there are no RCTs conducted describing the effectiveness of various amblyopia therapies in stimulus deprivation amblyophias. It's usually excluded as it's considered more severe and resistant to treatment. Patching still continues to be the gold standard in occlusion therapy, with an adhesive patch with total occlusion to form and light being recommended. The IATS had a pretty rigorous regimen of 1 hour per day per month of age. So you would patch a 6-month-old for 6 hours per day and 50% of waking hours after 8 months of age. In bilateral amblyopes with a milder form of amblyopia, the ATS recommendations of 2 to 6 hours of patching with near work can be applied. In children who are extremely resistant to patching therapy, atropine penalization combined with optical penalization can be tried in slightly older children. But in our clinical, again, with follow-up being an issue, some chance of atropine having side effects, this tends to be the second option for most of us. So coming to compliance with patching, as has rightly been said, whether we prescribe 6 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours, we really don't know how much patching is actually being done. Even in the amblyopia treatment studies, it is prescribed patching versus the patching which the child is actually getting. And several studies have said that this averages less than 50% of the prescribed hours. And the more number of hours you prescribe, the less the patient tends to patch. So if you prescribe 6 hours, the child is getting 2.5 hours. If you prescribe 12 hours, child may be getting 5 to 6 hours. So some recent suggestions are that educational intervention, so a counseling session with an orthoptist along with cartoons to actually explain to the child why the patching is being done, regular follow-up with rewards really helps in improving the compliance. The occlusion dose monitor is a new device which is mainly used in studies to now determine the dose response ratio. But these are basically thermal sensors which are embedded in the internal and external surface of the patch to accurately determine the duration of the actual patching which is being done rather than the prescribed patching. So newer therapies, again, I want to emphasize that the newer therapies, it's all for children who have maybe moderate amblyopia. When we go into the really severe amblyopia, eccentric fixation, these are not in consideration at all. Since Dr. Vaishali asked me to take names of some companies, I have to declare that I have no financial interest. The 3 most common types of therapies which are in use now are perceptual therapies, dichoptic therapies, and virtual reality is upcoming. Perceptual learning is based on the principle that practice makes perfect. So basically you have repetitive practice of software-based visual tasks, and this improves the visual performance by inducing plasticity of the visual system. These can include, targets can include Gabor patches, vernier acuity, and letter identification among noise. One of the companies is FDA approved, and they all claim really good results, but they are very small studies with a short follow-up and less number of patients to really declare that they are very effective. But they claim a 2.5 line improvement and 100% improvement in contrast. One of the main complaints is that the outcome measures, the improvement happens only for the particular activity for which the patient is trained and doesn't translate to real life. So some of the activities which happen, this is Revital Vision, which is currently available in India, both for office therapy and home therapy. So the activities may be like, which is the darker patch among the two, which of these patches is shifted, which of the patches have 3 images, or which of the squares contains the patch, and so on. So as you can see, the tasks tend to be quite boring. So for children, the acceptance rate I found practically is quite low. Coming to dichoptic therapy, now perceptual training is mainly for the amblyopic eye. It is monocular training. Dichoptic therapy believes that amblyopia is mainly a binocular vision problem and should be treated as a binocular problem and not just the problem eye. So unlocking the binocular visual function by presenting an independent visual stimuli to each eye, requiring integration in the brain of the 2 images. The image shown to the amblyopic eye is of higher contrast to compensate for the decreased contrast sensitivity. And as the vision improves, the contrast also improves or increases. So they are fun, they're of shorter duration, there's no patching involvement, so definitely the acceptance is better. And now we have some dicoptic movies also, which are available, popular movies available in a dicoptic format, which can just be passively viewed. So one of the systems which has been used for some time, and Shankar Netralaya also has this, is the Vision Therapy System 4. It provides dicoptic targets, which is a different target to each eye, using a stereoscopic TV with liquid crystal shutter goggles. The goggles turn transparent to opaque along with the target. It's synchronized with the target. And as the visual acuity improves, the targets become progressively smaller. I think the acceptance rate of vision therapy system, there are very few of them around in India, is because of the cost. And also these, the goggle is extremely delicate and quite expensive, tends to get damaged quite easily and is difficult to replace. Doesn't translate very well to home therapy. So, but based on the VTS, we have a number of homegrown dicoptic therapy and games which are now available. These are two of the companies I've named. These glasses, the anaglyphic glasses, red-blue glasses, are easily purchasable on Amazon. This particular game, which has been studied quite a bit, is called Digrush. And basically a red target is provided to the right eye, a blue target to the left eye. And the game you can proceed with only if you're able to view both the targets simultaneously. The background tends to be neutral, which is viewed by both the patients. So this is an adaptation. This patient is again wearing the red-blue glasses, and red target is being provided to stimulate the right eye. And finally, coming to virtual reality vision therapy, which is all the buzz right now. There are a couple of companies which are providing this in India as well. And it's gained a lot of commercial interest. So in this, unlike in dicoptic therapy, where the eyes are separated using red-blue glasses, in this they're separated by contrast. So the stronger eye is provided a target with lower contrast, and the weaker eye is provided a target with higher contrast. And you have to use both the eyes together again in order to play the game. The background remains the same, and the contrast is equalized between the two eyes as the vision improves. So this is a virtual reality headset. And these games are interactive. So we know that some of the older studies have also studied levodopa in amblyopia. So it said that endorphins may help in improving the neuroplasticity. So these games may be releasing endorphins because you're actively involved. They are shooter games, and we know video games, provide a high. So that may also be helping with the improvement. So these are all newer avenues towards amblyopia therapy. But and finally, I don't want to conclude without, so Dr. Santan Gopal has developed his own amblyopia treatment device, which has an inverse principle. It believes that we need to start stimulation from the cortex and not from the eye. So his device basically consists of these LCD lights, and with a central red light and surrounding white lights. And the therapy is short lasting, it's only about an hour. And it consists of initially moving the eyes to identify which light is glowing. And in the second part, it consists of focusing on the central red light while trying to count the peripheral lights which are lighted up. So the saccadic movements basically help in activating again the cortical response. And he's reporting very good results with the same. And I would like to conclude that again to emphasize that these newer amblyopia therapies may be useful for children who are cognitively normal and who have good hand-eye coordination. But a lot of children with bilateral cataract have multiple other systemic problems. A lot of them have CVI as well. So our rehabilitation, in the majority of children tends to be more traditional, involving patching, involving combined and coordinated use of medical, social, educational, and vocational measures to bring them to the highest level of functionality. And with that, I conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Varshini. That was very enlightening and informative, and I must dare say that it was not boring at all. But I think, what I understood and why we wanted to discuss this is that now, like we are moving ahead with surgery, with techniques, with understanding, it is also time that once we start talking about newer technologies, like you said, everything may not be translatable today to every scenario, but this will get us thinking, and in that direction, and with the AI and so much more new technology coming in, I think we need to think of better and more user-friendly alternatives for children to patching.
No. So many of them are very user friendly, and I think most of us have started offering it clinically as an alternative now for older children who have failed patching. So this, as it requires a lot of hand-eye coordination and concentration. So children older than 8 to 9 years, we start trying them out when we know patching is not very effective anymore in that age group, if it has been tried properly at a younger age. So we are practically using this in most of our clinics now.
Absolutely. So I think this is very valuable information for all our attendees as well. Any comments from any other panelists? You need to unmute yourself. You're muted.
I have a question for Varshini, very simple, basic question. I used to believe that you cannot prevent or develop the vision after 10 years of age in an amblyopic eye. So what is the age that you give up, that now there is no hope, or what is a message to the person? Because some people say, you know, it's not going to work after 7 years, some say 10 years and 12. What's your take on that?
So my take is now it depends on the motivation of the patient. So I explain the options to them, and it depends on how much motivation they have to try. I tell them the options, I tell them the studies, and I have a lot of older patients as well who have improved by say 2 lines. Again, whether it makes a practical difference to them is the question, but objectively there is an improvement. And in children who are diagnosed late, then I don't have an age cutoff, because I have like 14-year-old children diagnosed with severe anisometropic amblyopia, maybe with a +6 hyperopic error, who have improved extremely well with glasses, patching, and these exercises. They even come up to 6/9. So yeah, in older children, I don't think we have any reason to deny them the treatment. But of course, treatment is much harder because the motivation levels are much lesser by that age.
And the improvement that you achieve, does it remain
Yes.
for a long time or ever,
Yes.
or what is it?
So I have a couple of patients. I mean, since these are relatively new techniques, we've been following them up for about a couple of years, and we find that it is sustainable.
Very good. Nice. So we'll try that. We'll remember this. Very good. And the one which Gopal, Santham Gopal had playing with the cortical cells, is it available in the market?
Yes.
Or is it on?
Yes. No,
yes,
no, it is
okay.
available. It is being marketed. I don't have any personal experience with it, but since he reports really good results, I want to ask Dr. Sumita ma'am her take as well, if they've managed to try it.
Because it sounds, it makes sense what
Yes.
he's saying and doing. Very nice. Okay.
Dr. Sumita, your experience, like Varshini said, with this new device from Dr. Gopal or any other thing?
Actually, I have not seen this device by Dr. Gopal, and the paper which he published in IJO had a mix and match of various types of amblyopia. There are no pre-treatment visual acuity and post-treatment. How much was it in actual terms? So there is a gap in time. Probably he wanted to rush through the publication, but if it
also,
is
the initial visual acuity was very good in this paper.
Yeah, in this paper visual acuity was
there were already 612 or so initially.
So very difficult to make out really if it is really working. And so I'm going by what he has published in that paper. I have no personal experience. I have not seen him. But if it is working, it is self-evident and it will become popular, and it should. The principle seems to be all right in its place, that amblyopia is a cortical phenomenon and you can work it the reverse way. But what evidence is out for us to review probably needs little more. I mean, somebody else should report similar results before we take it. So yeah, I think there is some time before we can say, it's definitely working. But idea sounds good, and I have no objection to trying it out.
Thank you. So I think we move on to the last, but definitely not the least talk of the session by Dr. Sumita. Jinal, can I request you to?
Yes. I would like to welcome Dr. Sumita Agarkar. Ma'am, can I request you to please share your screen and start your presentation? Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Strabismus surgeons always come the last. So I am. So what are the paradigms here? Basically, honestly speaking, from the surgical point of view, there is very little difference with what I do for children who have had cataract surgery versus who have never had a cataract surgery. So basically, it is a very, very strongly associated with childhood cataracts, reporting to as high as 86%. Studies a little, but probably somewhere around 50% is what everybody, all of us would agree that it is as high as almost 50%. Now, cataracts can be pre-existing, and also remember, they can also develop some time after cataract surgery despite good surgical outcomes. So this is something, again, we need to monitor even if the surgery has gone off well. If you look at the literature, probably it is the most frequently required second surgery, probably rivaling only glaucoma surgeries, which are again quite frequent. Presence of strabismus, why we need to worry about it? Because it can add to the visual impairment despite having good surgical outcomes initially after surgery. And it definitely interferes with good binocular vision, stereopsis and all post-cataract surgery, even if your results have been, visual outcomes have been good following surgery. So that is something which we need to talk to the parents and probably offer at a certain stage. What causes, why strabismus happens? Basically, if it is pre-existing, it's usually the cataract in children, which leads to disruption of both binocular and sensory fusion. Sensory and motor fusion, and that is a very, very strong stimulus for loss of alignment. So if vision is poor, eyes tend to diverge or converge depending on the age of the children. There can be other mechanisms also post-surgery. So sometimes a phakic correction induces a significant anisometropia, again, which can lead to strabismus. And almost all studies have reported that children who wore a phakic correction tend to have more strabismus compared to children who have had IOLs. Again, deprivation of the visual stimulus is also a strong stimulus for strabismus formation. And sometimes in bilateral cataract, if visual acuity is unequal, especially children who have unequal cataracts can end up with strabismus either pre-existing or post-surgery. So what are the risk factors which are associated with strabismus? Younger age at the time of surgery. If it is not pre-existing, that is a risk factor. Children who are likely to have strabismus. Visual outcome post-surgery also is, if you have not had a very good visual outcome, like we don't have it in unilateral cats, your children are likely to get strabismus. Unilateral cataract itself is a very, very strong stimulus for strabismus of all kinds. Persistent fetal vasculature has been a very, very strong association, at least reported by this study, which looked at strabismus in cataract surgery. And they did find a very strong association between PFV and strabismus. Aphakia versus pseudophakia, it's a little bit complicated. There are studies which showed that pseudophakic children do better when a strabismus, but this particular study, which I'm quoting here, data at all, did not find, they found strabismus equal in aphakia and pseudophakia, but both IATA study and several other studies have found pseudophakic children have lesser prevalence of strabismus compared to aphakic children. Now, PCO is also, or visual axis opacification is also very, very strong association with new strabismus. Sometimes unilateral cataract trauma and all, sometimes strabismus can develop post-surgery, and that sometimes can be due to PCO or visual axis opacification, which leads to decrease in vision. So what do you do for these children who are pre-operative evaluation? Sometimes pre-surgery strabismus is pre-existing and often is a feature. In fact, a lot of children in cataract present with parents have not noticed the cataracts, the strabismus which is present. So it's an important diagnostic tool in pre-operative evaluation. Presence of strabismus also indicates that cataract is visually significant, especially in bilateral cataract. And it's a very good decision-making tool as far as the surgical intervention for cataract is concerned. So I use strabismus in cataract patients for preoperative evaluation on decision making regarding surgery. Like this child who came, this is post surgery, this picture is post surgery, but definitely, as you can see, it's the right eye, left eye which is squinting is what brought the parents to me. So when do you plan strabismus surgery? When either vision is equal or a full trial of amblyopia therapy or visual rehabilitation has been done in terms of amblyopia therapy, glasses, everything, or best possible visual outcomes have been achieved following your visual rehabilitation. Then that's the time to plan strabismus surgery in children, post-cataract surgery, I mean. And of course, the second factor is sometimes reliable measurements also, because very young children, if you have put IOL in infants, very difficult till they are at least 1.5 to 2 years to offer surgery. And if the visual outcome has been good following cataract surgery, you can plan a slightly earlier surgery or younger children also. However, in amblyopic children and special children, if they have exotropia, you can delay the surgery because they are likely to have a recurrence of strabismus as they grow older again. So sometimes in those children, you may offer surgery when they're a little bit older. Now, cataract surgery itself can provide alignment. So that's why I said you probably have to give a trial of half before your squint surgery, because several patients who were studied in a study did orthotropy, and several patients who did not have developed strabismus after surgery. So sometimes cataract surgery itself. So good surgery is the beginning for a lot of good things for children. Now, measurements in these patients are probably similar like any other measurements. So larger target fraction, especially in younger children, can alter measurements, and appropriate correction should be applied using the standard tables which are available for vertex correction. Aphakic children, it's preferable to do the measurements with contact lenses in place to avoid prismatic effect of really high-powered contact lenses, convex lenses, which they are wearing. So you can get correct measurements and make appropriate surgical plans. Nystagmus also, a lot of these children do have nystagmus, and that can make the measurements tricky. And if you do notice a null point of nystagmus or abnormal head posture in these children, it is good to note this, and this should be factored in when you are making a plan for surgical correction. So like this child picture post-surgery, his alignment, but if you see there is a plastic glass on his eye, he's around 8 months old, and despite IOL, he has a power of near correction is coming to 7.5, and this can produce to measure the angles in this patient. So needs to be factored in. When you come to horizontal strabismus is often more common, exotropia is most frequent. If you are planning a surgery, then probably limbal incisions, fornix incisions are preferred because you try to keep the limbus intact. Should there be a need for glaucoma surgery, these patients later, it's better to leave area around the limbus unscarred, and they will thank you for it. Careful dissection and hooking is important. A lot of times these patients can have surprises when it comes to the anatomy of the muscles. Sometimes eyes are small, sometimes eyes are very big. So both these things should be kept in mind when you're doing dissecting. Surgical dosage also depends on measurements, and I will not go into details beyond the purview of this talk. But if the child has a head posture with nystagmus, squint surgery can address this. Sometimes you may have to convince the parents to do it in both eyes to address strabismus as well as nystagmus and AHP. And I think this counseling should be done prior to the surgery. When we are doing that, I'm going to try to correct also, and I have to correct. And also this will improve functionality of the patient. And of course, all these children are prone for re-squinting much later, and counseling for re-surgery should be done at the time of first surgery itself. Doing it together, not recommended in doing a strabismus, and it's sometimes tempting to offer both the surgeries at the same time to avoid 2 anesthesia sittings. But probably in younger children, it is just not recommended because we don't know what their visual outcomes are going to be and what problems you are going to face during surgery. It unnecessarily prolongs the surgery and anesthesia time. older children, sometimes where you are more or less certain of what visual outcomes you are going to get, squint surgery and cataract surgery can be combined. When I say older children, I mean teenagers and sometimes young adults. So this is a one patient which came to me with occasional squinting. Again, visual acuity detected as 618, zonular cataract, underwent surgery in 2017. Visual acuity improved to 6/6 with glasses, but still had an exotropia. And as you can see this picture here, he had a typical zonular cataract. Now in 2020, visual acuity is around 20/20. Residual exotropia of 8 to 10 prisms is still there, but he has a good stereopsis with glasses. So this is him pre-surgery, and this is him on the first post-operative day. As you can see, there is a still small residual exotropia. You can see it here, but it is compatible with good alignment standards, and he is using and has stereopsis. So this is one where we got lucky and we had good surgery and good visual as well as functional outcomes. So in conclusion, when you are doing planning a strabismus surgery in children who have had cataract surgery, correct timing is very important. Appropriate measurements and corrections to be applied. If required, measurements to be repeated with contact lenses, at least 2 consistent measurements before you plan for surgery. And most important, addressing the visual rehabilitation before you do anything for the strabismus is very, very important. So visual rehabilitation in terms of glasses, in terms of amblyopia therapy. I won't say that everybody improves to 6/6, may not, but your best trial should be given before you plan for squint surgery, because that has an importance to your stability of your outcomes following squint surgery also. If children have had their best visual acuity, they are likely to do better with squint surgery. If they are not doing well visual outcome wise, then you can probably delay the surgery, or you can even tell the patient that this child may require another surgery more confidently. So if you do all of this, a lot of times it's a happy cosmetic as well as a functional outcome. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Again, that was very enlightening, and 2 things which were reiterated more and more for me. One is that strabismus is important in decision making, but also counseling. So pre-operatively, a lot of our population in our geography comes with strabismus. So, counseling them, parents are mostly concerned about the cosmetic strabismus in many cases. So counseling, it's an excellent tool to demonstrate the presence of amblyopia and the tough road that already lies ahead, and preparing them for multiple surgeries, and prior to that, giving a full-hearted trial of visual rehabilitation. So I think these are really, really important rather than just jumping into the technicalities of squint surgery. Any comments from anybody?
Sometimes one more point I would like to make. Sometimes in squint surgery in very young children, if you do the surgery and your visual, your fixation pattern is a very important tool to say if a child is using that eye or not. And sometimes when you do the squint surgery, you take away that tool which you have to assess a child's fixation preference. So sometimes avoid doing squint surgeries in very, very young children, especially the pre-verbal ones. And if you don't have
I think we lost Dr. Sumita, but you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
No, I think Sumita's point is very correct, because sometimes when the mother comes with a squinting eye and aphakia, one eye, or it's very easy to jump into the surgery without much of a assessment of fixation and other patterns. So I think that's something it's very useful tip that you gave us today, Sumita. Very nice.
So I think with that, we are at the end of time for our session, and I hope we had, I don't know whether we had or how many attendees are there, but I hope you all enjoyed. I, for one, really enjoyed being part of this and listening to all these simple, practical talks. And we all realize that this is a team effort. It's a multi-pronged approach, and best done with dedication and time. I think this is the two things we need. You can't have a 150 OPD and yet say that I will also do this by the way. A lot of dedication and time from each member of the team is the key to success in every aspect of pediatric cataract management. And once again, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to have a physical meeting next year. Stay safe. Take care, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so much, Dr.
Varshini.
Vaishali.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Dr.
Varshini.
Vasavada. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sumita. Thank you, Vasant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for keeping the hall in time and
Thank
coordinating.
you.
Thank you.
It was a great informative session. Thank you.